To Malachi and Beyond. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of the book, Consider My Servant Job. Hey, this makes great stocking stuffer. Christmas is coming up, and you can buy it at Amazon.com or from Cedar Fort, my publisher. The link is below in the comment section, so take a look at it. You have plenty of time. I think we got about a week before Christmas if you really want it. I have to sell. I mean, this helps finance my this work here. I have to show my publisher that they like people like my book, and they like what I'm doing here with this podcast. Buy a copy and give it to a friend or two, and then we could do some book signings if enough people show interest to it. Now, where was I? Oh, Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Today it's a Ghirardelli hot chocolate, double chocolate, and mixed with hot milk. Here we are. We're at the end of this. We're at the end of the Old Testament. Malachi, for 4 chapters like the book of Ruth or the book of Jonah. So it's not a excuse me, a notice popped up. So it's not a complex lesson today like we had with some of the other readings, like with the Psalms or Proverbs, where you're just reading a lot of stuff. 4 chapters, not a lot of verses. And so let's dig into it. First of all, who is Malachi? We have no idea. And with some of the books, like with Isaiah and with some of the other prophets, they'll list who they were, the time that they're alive, just to give a bit of a dating. We don't have that with Malachi, so we have no idea about him. Guess is that he lived around 420 BC, but we don't know that for certain. And another thing too is, the name Malachi is interesting because it's Hebrew for my messenger, and that comes a little bit that comes into play with chapter 3, verse 1. So it's a very cryptic and enigmatic book, and we might even have some questions about this if it weren't for the fact that Jesus Christ quoted this book in the Book of Mormon at the last 2 chapters in 3rd Nephi. So here's a question: what's it about those last 2 chapters that the Nephites needed to know? So I'm not going to give an answer. Just think about that and come to your own conclusion. Another thing, too, as you read this book is written in a form of dialogue where the person asks a question, then it has an answer, a little bit like a catechism, like Socratic dialogues, catechisms. And that's actually a very distinctive Jewish trait. Jews really thrive on asking questions, giving answers. You know, there's the old joke about 2 Jews and 3 opinions, and that's really what the Talmud is, people talking through issues. And these conversations and asking questions are very healthy. And I think that's reflected in this book. So 4 chapters. Chapter 1, and like I said, is read the Bible dictionary first, read the chapter headings, and then read the chapters, and things will go a lot smoother, especially if this is your first time through the book. So chapter 1, it talks about the problems that were going on, that they're offering improper sacrifices, sacrificing with moldy bread and having sick cattle instead of giving the Lord their best. It's a bit like using warm water, brackish water and moldy bread when you're passing the sacrament. It just doesn't, come on, you can use it. If you don't have bread, you can use saltine crackers or whatever to compensate for it. This is a little bit interesting with Brigham Young. Said a similar thing. This is back in the days when they'd take tithing in kind, and you'd have the same thing when you pay tithing this way. You give the first fruits, the best of the fruit, to the church, and keep the lesser stuff for yourself. And so actually, if you're poor, you'd be living on better food than most of the people if they were following the law. So what Brigham Young said is, when a good handsome cow has been turned in on tithing, she has been smuggled. And an old 3-titted cow, one that would kick the tobacco out of the mouth of a man who went to milk her, would be turned into the general tithing office instead of the good cow. If $100 in cash were paid into the hands of a bishop, in many instances he smuggled it and turned into the general tithing office an old ring-bone spavined horses instead of the money. I'm inquiring after such conduct, and I continue until I cleanse the inside of the platter. That's from Journal of Discourses 8.317. Journal of Discourses 8.317. Brigham Young had a similar problem. People came paying tithing. They said, okay, here's the worst cow. Let's give that over to God. Keep the best stuff for ourselves. If you catch that, what happened is sometimes what some of the bishops were doing is they'd get tithing money paid in cash. So they take that money, buy a horse with the money, and give the horse into the this sort of deformed horse into the church. And so that was some of the monkey business going on. In fact, Brigham Young talked a little bit about that. If you read Journal of Discourses, how people would steal his fence post. And one of the things they do is they go over to Brigham Young's house, tell his wife or one of his wives, saying, hey, Brigham Young said I could have some of your sugar and molasses. And the wife wouldn't know any better, so she'd give it to him, and it was just really causing problems. So Brigham Young had to speak out about it. So, yeah, monkey business and tithing back in the days of Malachi and the days of Brigham Young. Hopefully that's stopped, and I hope we can live up to our ideals. But are we giving our best? As I say in the introduction to this, I always show up and I always come prepared. That reason why I say that is because sometimes that doesn't happen in church. You have this sort of last minute, and I forgot the lesson, so let's just throw this together. And here I brought some cookies to compensate for giving a bad lesson. That's not how it works. The same thing for class members. Class members just kind of show up there and they don't read beforehand and expect the teacher to do all the teaching while they sit there and quasi-comatose saying, please teach me. That's what goes on in church, and it's not what we should be doing. We're not giving the Lord our best. We're holding back. Are you actually reading the scriptures, or are you just listening to podcasts, including mine? No, that's not how it works. This is a supplement. Chapter 2 talks about treacherous dealings, especially in the what the priests were up to, and also the last part of it, from verses 14 to 17, it talks about the problem with marriage and family, that people were just getting off track with marriages, divorces, not taking marriage seriously, not a lot different from nowadays. So, that last part on Chapter 2:14, read it very carefully. Maybe you want to reread it. It's a pity that's not in the Book of Mormon, but it was Christ's judgment call. So chapter 3 in the Book of Mormon along with chapter 4. So ask yourself, why was this put in there? Think about it. I mean, I'm not sure that there's one answer, but there's certainly a reason for why it was put in there. And we spent a lot of time talking about Isaiah, but there's Micah, and these chapters in the Book of Malachi are also in the Book of Mormon. So chapter 3, verse 1, behold, the Lord that you seek will suddenly come to his... behold, I'll prepare the messenger before the way of the Lord, and the Lord that you seek will suddenly come to his temple. So we're talking about the Lord's coming to his temple, and there's going to be a messenger. So who's the messenger? Is that Malachi himself? Because that's what his name means, is messenger. The same way that my last name is Hunter. That's the name I was born with. I had some ancestors, sister who went around, killed animals, and... that's how I ended up with that. And okay, wait a second. I was trying to read it in the Book of Mormon, but let's just get to the point. Let's do this really quickly. So Malachi, who's the messenger? Is it John the Baptist? Was it Simeon and Anna when Christ was circumcised and Christ went to the temple? Is it Joseph Smith who has prepared the way for the second coming? Or if you read in D&C, section 45, verse 9, it says, even so have I sent mine everlasting covenant into the world, to be a light to the world, and to be a standard for my people and for the Gentiles to seek to it, and to be a messenger before my face to prepare the way before me. Or is it all these, you have the application, it just different, Christ comes to his temple at different times, Kirtland Temple, there's future prophecies, and we'll get into that next year when we study the New Testament, but the messenger, the gospel itself is the message. Actually, Christ is preparatory to meeting the Father. You have the first comforter, you have the second comforter, then you have the third comforter, the third member of the Godhead, and it goes in reverse order. So, that's an interesting passage, and so is the rest of it. It goes on to talk about tithing. So recently in sort of the blogosphere, there was a member of the church who is a social media influencer, and I've had contact with her personally, so she's not a vicious. She can be vicious at times. She apologizes, but she's not really what you call malicious, but she said that because the church has this investment fund, she hasn't paid tithing in 3 years. So, and she feels like this is misappropriation of church funds. And so, in light of what you just read, is that a good approach to it? Now, here's a question. The church has this investment fund, so we're not hiding it. I mean, the church, the presiding bishop, Casse, has talked about it. What do you think about that? And what does God think about that? And how do you get an answer to clarify that? That's one of the gifts of the Spirit, the gift of knowledge. I need to know why the church has this investment fund. Here's a complaint. Well, since the days of Joseph Smith and more pointedly at Brigham Young, people complained about the church intervening in temporal affairs. That's just gone on constantly, and it's just no different now. But keep in mind, so do you think this investment fund's a good idea? Is that the good use of tithing, and why is that so? And this person who is critical of the church, I put a link to it. Does she or does she not use the correct name of the church, and does that tell you something? So let's kind of skip on. This isn't really about that. Another thing is, so it's tithing, second coming tithing. The last part is the Book of Remembrance. And it's really interesting. We think about Wilford Woodruff's journals, and that's a really powerful parallel history to the official history of the church. And I think about half of the sermons that we have of Joseph Smith are traceable back to him. That were just recorded by him alone, and that's available. It's a valuable resource. In fact, I'm going to put a link to it a little bit below to one of Wilford Woodruff's versions of the sermon. So, chapter 4, Second Coming, and it talks about keeping the law of Moses, and that's interesting to keep in mind as we're finishing up the Old Testament, going into the New Testament, is transitioning over, and we have the same problem too: transitioning to ministering, transitioning to have one quorum of priesthood brethren as opposed to separate ones. No elders, 70s, or high priests like it used to be, that they're together. And some people struggle with that, and some people have left the church or in the process of leaving the church over because they don't like that, having elders and high priests meet together. So that's not a new problem. We've had it with the law of Moses. Abinadi talks about that. It was a problem among the Nephites, as you read in 3 Nephi chapter 1, verse 24-25. People, when Christ was born, they thought they had to stop the law of Moses, and so it's after the resurrection is when you stop it. Talks about in Galatians 3:19. You have Elijah coming to the temple. Elijah turning, and that great promise about the hearts of the children turning to the fathers. And it was something that Moroni quoted to Joseph Smith. It's in the Book of Mormon. Yes, the Book of Mormon does talk about temples. So I put a link to Joseph Smith's sermon in the Joseph Smith manual where he talks about the spirit of Elijah. So it's a good link to double check and expand what you understanding about the spirit of, not just the spirit of Elijah, but Elijah and temple work. But also I put a link to the original transcript of Joseph Smith's talk on the spirit of Elijah, Elias, and also Mosiah. Elias, Elijah, Mosiah. And there's an important distinction between those three. We talk about the spirit of Elijah, but never about the spirit of Elias, and never about the spirit of Mosiah, but they're all interconnected. That's it. We just finished the Old Testament in a year. So let's do a little bit of a wrap-up. What did you learn? How are you more Christ-like? When we studied Isaiah, how did that go? What can you do to improve things with your Come Follow Me study? What do we need to do to make this better for next year and also beyond? The Christ quotient. So the book of Malachi is a testament of Jesus Christ. The Old Testament is a testament of Jesus Christ. All the scriptures are testaments of Jesus Christ. As you study them, you'll be able to see them. And when you read the book of Malachi, think about Christ-likeness and making righteous sacrifices versus having meetings without agenda that are just sort of free-floating discussions, off-topic stuff. Are you doing things appropriately in the church without going overboard? Without going overboard? What's your understanding of marriage? Are you following the principles in the family proclamation? Are you paying tithing, or are you mad at the church so you withhold tithing because you know better than God? And what about Elijah? How is temple work? How does the whole spirit of Elijah, how's that affecting you? When's the last time you went to the temple? They're open again. I don't know if you'd heard that. Lastly, what can we do to make Come Follow Me better than it was this year? I realize that the Old Testament is not the most accessible book, but it's a witness of Jesus Christ. And if we study the Old Testament, we can come unto Christ. And that is the point.